Congressman Ron DeSantis is a congressman from the 6th Congressional District. It's always good to visit with him. He joins us now live today on WNDB's Marc your program. Congressman, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm very well, and I have to tell you, ever since you first told us the story about your plans working with Matt Salmon for a 28th Amendment to the Constitution that would require that Congress go by the same rules and opportunities as the average person, I have not met a single person who didn't think that this is a great idea. Where's it going?
Well, I'll tell you, I was talking to Majority Leader Eric Cantor, and he thought it was a good idea. And if I can get him on board, I'm almost assured that we'll be able to get a floor vote. So I'm going to be working on that. But it's interesting, Mark, you and I had last talk in early August when we introduced this. About 10 hours after we talked, there was a late-night report that there was a deal struck to provide members of Congress and their staffs with a special Obamacare subsidy that no other American would be able to get. And so we knew something like this was coming. But on the very day we introduced the 28th Amendment, the Office of Personnel Management said that members of Congress are going to be eligible for $10,000 subsidy that is not authorized by statute and that is not available to every other American. And so this amendment is timely, but I think this immediate decision needs to be fought as well. And so what I'm going to be doing when I get back to Washington, we get back in session in September, is to file a bill to overturn the special Obamacare subsidy for members of Congress, and I will probably end up trying to attach that as an amendment to the continuing resolution. It's just not fair, and it's also not legal, because when they passed Obamacare, Senator Grassley got in an amendment that basically said members of Congress and their staffs should be treated exactly the same as the millions of Americans who are going to see their health care arrangements upended because of Obamacare. So these are people who are going to get pushed into exchanges, and that's where members should be. That's what the law says, and it's bad enough when Congress treats itself differently from the rest of the public, but it's even worse when the bureaucracy does it, because when the bureaucracy does it without having statutory authority, they're relieving the members of Congress from having to go on record. And I think every member of Congress needs to go on record so that their constituents know whether they believe that they should get a subsidy that nobody else gets.
Congressman, I want to go to foreign affairs here for a moment and ask you, I think it was Congressman David Schweikert of Arizona, that had introduced a bill, and I think you might have been one of the co-sponsors, conditioning the Economic Assistance and Support to Egypt Act. This came in late June. In light of what we know now, what should our policy be with Egypt, in your opinion?
You know, it's interesting. When I signed on to that, the Muslim Brotherhood was in charge. Now there's a fight to see who's in charge. And so for me, I think that the worst case scenario for the United States, for our allies in the region like Israel, and really for the peace of the world, is to have a Muslim Brotherhood government. And so I think the law may require us to just cut off aid because there was essentially a military coup. But I just think that we need to be careful that we're not showing us to be in favor of the Brotherhood, because somebody like John McCain, you know, McCain was arguing against what we were trying to do by reducing or conditioning the aid to the Muslim Brotherhood, because we knew the Brotherhood wasn't good. Then once the Brotherhood got pushed out, McCain saying, oh, immediately cut off the aid. The problem is that you're sending a signal to the Egyptian people that we're going to punish you if you react against the Muslim Brotherhood. And I can tell you, I was in Israel last week. I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I met with a lot of their intelligence and security personnel. The Muslim Brotherhood is bad news. I mean, these are people who will be aligned with Hezbollah, Hamas, and it will be eventually an Islamic terror state. And so that's obviously not in our national interest.
Let's talk about what the rest of that region is like, with the situation in Syria, with all of these refugees going to Turkey. Congressman, do you think that this fortifies your argument that we have to be energy independent so we're not so dependent on what goes on in that corner of the globe, keeping the oil spigots working in this country?
Without question. And the kind of the good news about our energy independence from the Middle East is and you wouldn't know this because the media tends not to report it. We've passed a number of bills in the House, from the Keystone Pipeline to the Hydrocarbons Agreement Act, that essentially could put us on the path to independence from Middle Eastern oil within the next 10 years. Now, the Senate doesn't agree with that approach. They basically want us to pay higher oil prices, and they're essentially admitting we're going to be dependent on Middle Eastern oil. I think this is a great opportunity for us to get away from that. It's pro-growth here, it's pro-jobs, and it's obviously better for us politically. Last week when I was in Israel, we actually went to the Golan Heights. You could actually see into Syria, and you could hear some of the shots firing. And talking with some of the Israelis, the interesting thing is we talk about rebels, but there are so many different groups, and there are a lot of Islamists who are fighting against Assad. So it's basically a murky situation where a lot of our enemies are fighting each other, and I think Israel was basically saying, hey, we're going to stay out of it as long as it's our enemies shooting at each other. And I think we are smart to kind of stand back and not get sucked into that, given that none of the parties really are pro-American in any real sense.
I did a search on some of your initiatives in anticipation of our talk today. There was a bill that was filed in June. I think Congressman Brooks out of Missouri did this, to terminate any federal employee who refuses to answer questions or gives false testimony in a congressional hearing. I mean, good for you guys. Do you think that thing will see the light of day?
Yeah, we've worked on that on the Oversight Committee, and the bottom line is, I think it's something that the Senate should take up as well. Because think about it, we have someone like Lois Lerner comes to the Oversight Committee. She takes the Fifth Amendment after exonerating herself, so we think she waived the Fifth, but put that aside. This happened months ago. She's been getting paid. She makes over $175,000 a year, and she's doing nothing. She's just on paid leave, I guess, infinitum. And that is just not acceptable. I mean, if you have to take the Fifth Amendment because of misconduct in your duties, hey, that's your right. We're not going to begrudge you your constitutional rights, but we're also not going to have the taxpayers fund you so that you can continue to not answer questions. I mean, you do have a duty to the taxpayers of this country when you're in a position of public trust. So to me, it's an absolutely common sense measure.
Congressman, we're having a town hall on September 3rd with one of your colleagues, Lou Barletta of Hazleton, Pennsylvania, along with Michael Cutler, talking about the negative effects of illegal immigration. We were talking with some folks from C-SPAN. They thought it was significant in light of the fact that you guys will all be going back to work on this issue on immigration very quickly right after that. Can you share with our audience what you think is likely to happen in Congress in the issue of immigration?
I think the biggest problem with having any type of meaningful immigration reform that would secure the borders and enforce the laws is that no matter what you do, if you have some type of compromise, this president is not going to enforce the law. I mean, he basically has taken the position with ObamaCare, with other initiatives, that he will enforce what he likes and he won't enforce what he doesn't like. And so it's hard to even get into a conversation about reforming the immigration system if you don't believe that the laws against illegal immigration will be enforced, if you don't believe that the border will be secured. And this has been a problem since '86 with almost every president we've had. And this is the first president who's actually taken an affirmative position that he can simply delay laws he disagrees with. To me, it's very ominous. I don't see how any of us in the House could have confidence that even if you had the perfect immigration bill, that he would enforce the provisions uniformly.
What about the IRS? We're hearing these horror stories about not only how they stop 501c3s from getting tax-exempt status, but how they're looking into the private lives of Americans, everything from phone calls to taxes. On all of this privacy, is this thing going to come to a head in the fall, Congressman?
We are absolutely going to have more oversight hearings. The committee has been interviewing a lot of people behind the scenes, so we are going to absolutely pursue it. I think what we need is more Americans to express their outrage, not for people like me who are already pursuing it, but for some of the other members of Congress, and so that the administration feels pressure, because what's happening is they're doing their best to stonewall, and they realize that at the end of the day, if they stonewall, we can subpoena documents. If they don't produce what we want, yes, we can hold them in contempt, but guess who we have to rely on to enforce a contempt decree? the Department of Justice and Eric Holder, and they're not going to want to help us in this investigation. So we have a relatively limited amount of power. We're trying to get the most out of it. And basically, I think what we need to do is get as much information out to the public as possible so that the American people can then take that and pressure their representatives to change. I mean, all of us on oversight, we're already committed. We've seen this. We realize it's an unaccountable bureaucracy. We're committed to holding people accountable and to wholesale reform. But there's not enough people in the Congress and in Washington right now who see it the way a lot of us do.
Finally, today, a lot of people believe there are two schools of thought on Obamacare. Either we defund it or we slow it down enough so that it has a natural death. I know you're not crazy about this and you're concerned about companies in the district that just will reduce hours or just plain out not hire people because of the cost that's going to be borne upon them. What's your vision for how we're going to handle the downside of Obamacare coming up?
Well, I think that we should defund Obamacare in the continuing resolution. In other words, we passed a resolution to fund the core operations of government, but withhold funding of Obamacare for two reasons. One, as you said, that will help mitigate a lot of these negative effects. But two, the president has taken the position, incredible position, that he can delay certain parts of the law. So he says he's going to delay the employer mandate even though he doesn't have authority to do it. He's never been able to explain how that's legal or constitutional. He refuses to allow us to delay the individual mandate, which is going to burden individuals and small businesses. Instead, he's giving the corporations a pass. And so if he's not willing to enforce the law as it's written, we in Congress, we cannot just stand by and allow that to happen. So the power of the purse is the constitutional check that we have. And so I think in the House, we need to use that. But it's more, the law is detrimental. It's causing us to go to more of a part-time nation where most of the new jobs created are part-time, and that's bad. But there's also major constitutional issues at stake. If a president can simply pick and choose which laws to enforce, can you imagine if Mitt Romney had been elected and he took the position that he was going to delay all this stuff? I mean, the press would be crying bloody murder if he took that position. This president, they generally support it, which I think is a double standard, but it's a very, very significant issue whether a president can simply pick and choose which laws to enforce.
Congressman Ron DeSantis of the 6th Congressional District, our guest today on WNDB. Congressman, always a pleasure. Thanks for giving us the time. All the best.
Anytime. Take care.
Thank you.